In mid-May, the president of Kazakhstan signed a declaration of eternal friendship with Turkey and a $1 billion deal to build Turkish combat drones on Kazakh soil. He called deeper Turkic unity an urgent priority. Then at the same summit, he killed the one thing that strikes fear into Russia, China, and Iran, a Turkic military alliance. That was the Turkestan Summit, May 2026. To understand why a leader signs an eternal friendship pact and refuses an alliance in the same breath, you have to go back 4 years and then back a century. In 2021, at the summit that created the modern Organization of Turkic States, the leader of Turkey's Nationalist Party handed Erdogan a map showing a Turan world, stretching from the Balkans to East Asia. Erdogan accepted it. He has since spoken about a Turan army. Tehran reacted with alarm, Moscow with suspicion. European outlets warned of a Pan-Turkic empire forming on Russia's southern flank. So which is the real picture? The map Erdogan was handed, or the line Tokayev just drew? Today, we go inside Pan-Turkism, what it actually is, where it came from, and why the map handed across a summit table tells you less than you think. I'm Bruce Pannier. I spent 4 decades covering the former Soviet Union. This is the Turan Research Center, hosted by the Yorktown Institute, where we break down the geopolitics of Turkey, Iran, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. If you're new here and want more analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's get into it.
Turkic world. As we bloom in unity, we grow stronger and we prosper. And at heart, we are always one.
Start with what's actually happening, because Turkic cooperation has reached unprecedented levels in recent years. The Organization of Turkic States, OTS, was founded in modest form in 2009 in Nakhchivan. In November 2021, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan reconstituted it as a more institutionally ambitious body. The Istanbul summit that year adopted the Turkic World Vision 2040. Hungary, Turkmenistan, and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus hold observer status. The architecture is thickened. The Turkic Investment Fund has begun operations. The Common Alphabet Commission, chaired by a deputy chairperson of the ruling AKP, has advanced proposals for orthographic convergence across the Turkic states. Parliamentary, educational, and media platforms have multiplied. Defense ties have become real. Turkish drones, particularly the Bayraktar TB2, proved decisive in Azerbaijan's victory in the 2020 Karabakh War and reframed Turkey's role in South Caucasus from rhetorical patron to material guarantor.
Bu sadece Azerbaycanlı kardeşlerimiz için değil, tüm Türk dünyası için büyük anlam taşımaktadır.
Defense exports, training, and joint exercises now run through Ankara's relationship with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan as well. And the rhetoric has escalated. Erdogan invokes the Turkic world in speeches that would have been inconceivable from a Turkish leader 2 decades ago.
Yeni adımız ve yapımız, Türk Devletleri Teşkilatı'yla bundan sonra daha hızlı, özellikle ısrarla kök salacak, büyüyecek, gelişecek ve serpileceğiz.
Azerbaijan's president Ilham Aliyev has gone further, asserting that the Turkic world does not consist of independent Turkic states only, and that its boundaries extend to compatriots living beyond the countries that are members.
Çünkü bizim geleceğimiz için, bilge geleceğimiz için çok möhkem zemin var, möhkem temel var. Bu bizim ortak köklerimizdir, dilimizdir, dinimizdir ve ortak maraqlarımız, çıkarlarımızdır.
Burhanuddin Duran, Turkey's deputy foreign minister, has argued that Ankara should adopt a balancing role to ensure that Beijing does not engage with the Turkic world as it has with Africa. So, you have a real organization, real defense cooperation, and rhetoric that talks about a Turkic civilizational space stretching from the Balkans to East Asia. From Tehran's perspective, from Moscow's, from Brussels, that's a story worth watching. But to understand whether it's actually a coherent geopolitical project, you have to go back to where the idea came from in the first place. And you have to do something most coverage of this topic doesn't do. You have to separate two ideas that get used as if they're the same. Pan-Turkism and Turanism are routinely conflated in current debate. They have separate intellectual histories. Pan-Turkism emerged from the late Ottoman Empire's response to imperial decline. The late 19th and early 20th centuries produced a wave of transnational ideological projects. Pan-Slavism shaped Russian imperial policy. Pan-Germanism shaped the German and Austro-Hungarian spheres. Pan-Italian sentiment had contributed to the unification of Italy in 1870.
Young Turks were educated in European institutions. They knew more European languages like French or Germanese mostly. And they saw how, for example, Pan-Italic ideas helped to Italy to unify Italy as a one country. Pan-Italic movements or such movement like Young Italians also motivated Ottoman military officers because Young Turk Revolution was organized by military officers.
Within this environment, Ottoman intellectuals, many educated in European institutions but rooted in Islamic traditions, searched for an ideological response to fiscal crisis, territorial fragmentation, and external pressure. They observed how rival powers used pan-ideologies to reinforce state cohesion. They formulated a parallel response. The Young Turks looked at how Pan-Italian and Pan-German movements had consolidated states and elevated monarchies. They expected a Pan-Turkic project to do something similar: consolidate society around the Sultan, stimulate modernization, and extend Ottoman influence into the Caucasus and Central Asia. It didn't work as intended. The rise of Turkish nationalism deepened internal fractures, alienating non-Turkish populations, Arabs and Armenians most prominently.
When Pan-Turkic ideology, Pan-Turanism, was started in Ottoman Empire as a mainstream idea, as a state ideology, Armenians and mostly Arabs inside Ottoman Empire, they felt this fear, like, okay, you guys are going to create something like Pan-Turkic new empire. But where is our place inside this empire? Because we are not Turk.
Parallel nationalist movements emerged in response. Al-Fatah, the Young Arab Society, was founded in 1909 by Arab students in Paris, one of the earliest organized expressions of modern Arab nationalist thought. Turanism is something else, and it didn't even originate in Ottoman political thought. It was introduced by Matthias Alexander Kastren, a scholar of Finno-Ugric and Siberian languages working within the intellectual framework of the Russian Empire.
Orthodox Turanism didn't include any Turks into this civilization framework. They saw Turanist ideological circles in Austro-Hungarian Empire itself and Finland, which was part of Russian Empire during that time. They saw different to how Turanism should work and to integrate these peoples, and they more focused to Finnic people or Ugric people in Russian Empire, and most focusing to this geographic area.
This expansive vision was institutionalized in the Turan Society, founded in Budapest in 1910 under Paul Teleki, which promoted the idea of a transcontinental Turan stretching from Europe to East Asia. Here's the key move. Ziya Gökalp, the principal theorist of Turkism within the Ottoman context, rejected this civilizational scope. In his work, The Principles of Turkism, Gökalp confined the concept strictly to Turkic peoples, excluding groups like Hungarians and Finns. He took an idea borrowed from Hungarian and Finno-Ugric scholarship and narrowed it down to a Turkic-only frame. That divergence is the source of much of the confusion today. When commentators talk about a tyrannic empire stretching across Eurasia, they're typically using the broader civilizational vocabulary that Kastren and Hungarians worked with. When they talk about Pan-Turkism, they're describing the much narrower Gökalp frame. Different ideas, different histories, different implications. It matters because the institutional vehicle today, the Organization of Turkic States, is built on the narrower frame. Its membership criterion is Turkic linguistic and cultural identity. Hungary's observer status is the closest gesture toward the older, broader Turanism, and even that is symbolic rather than structural.
Türk historiografyası yani tarih yazılımında hani Macarların her zaman için Hristiyanlaşmış ve Türklüklerini unutmuş bir ulus oldukları anlatılır en azından Türk tarih anlatısında. Bunun bir şekilde kucaklaşmasını, bir şekilde tarihle barıştığını da görüyoruz aslında bu Türk Devletleri Teşkilatı'nın. Birazcık da jeostratejik olarak da düşündüklerini düşünmek gerekir. Yani Avrupa Birliği'nin içerisinde Türk Devletleri Teşkilatı'yla ortak çalışabilecek bir partner devlet yaratma güdüsü de var tabii ki bunda real politik olarak baktığımızda.
Turkey's first leaders understood the dangers of ideological adventurism. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and Hungarian Admiral Miklos Horthy, navigating two different constraints, both pulled back. Atatürk focused on building state nationalism within republican borders, deliberately avoiding any provocation with the Soviet Union. Leadership of the radical nationalist wing in Turkey gravitated to figures like Nihal Atsiz, an ideologue of Pan-Turkism whose writings promoted an exclusionary, radicalized vision of Turkish identity. His work identified communists, Jews, Persians, and Russians as civilizational enemies, reflecting the broader climate of extremist nationalism of the period. A comparable strain of rhetoric appeared in Iraq through figures like Hayrallah Talfa, the maternal uncle and early mentor of Saddam Hussein, who authored a pamphlet entitled Three Whom God Should Not Have Created: Persians, Jews, and Flies. Meanwhile, Nuri Kiligil, known as Nuri Pasha, the half-brother of Enver Pasha, returned to Turkey after Atatürk's death. During the Second World War, he established an arms production enterprise and maintained contacts with Nazi Germany. He is often associated in historical literature with facilitating links between German authorities and Turkic populations from the Soviet Union, including formations like the Turkestan Legion. The turning point came in 1944. After the German defeated Stalingrad, Ankara reassessed the risks of alignment with pro-German and radical nationalist circles. Concerned that such currents could provoke Soviet pressure or even intervention, the Turkish government moved against them. The 1944-45 racism-Turanism trials produced arrests and prosecutions of prominent Pan-Turkist figures, Atsiz among them. Many convictions were later overturned on appeal, but the political message was unambiguous.
Hungary. Once again, that magic password, sport, enables the newsreel camera to take a peep behind the Iron Curtain.
After the Second World War, the doctrine was effectively shut out of public life on both ends of the geographic vision. Hungary, absorbed into the Soviet bloc, underwent repressive campaigns comparable in scale and method to Stalinist purges. Under one-party communist consolidation, Turanist ideas were eliminated from public and political life entirely. In Turkey, under Kemalist leadership during the Cold War, Pan-Turkist circles, particularly those associated with the Grey Wolves, were confined to the domestic arena. Turkish intelligence, military elites, and political leadership initially marginalized these groups, then selectively co-opted them as instruments against leftist and communist opposition. The Grey Wolves were used in street confrontations and in suppressing student unrest. During periods of military intervention, they functioned as an auxiliary ideological and operational extension of the security apparatus. They were not permitted to engage in any meaningful cross-border activity. This is the piece of history that gets skipped over a lot. Even with the Turkish nationalist tradition, the strategic limits of Pan-Turkism were openly acknowledged. Alparslan Türkeş, the founder of the Nationalist Movement Party, the MHP, the founder of the Grey Wolves, the figure most associated with the hard nationalism in Turkish politics, framed the doctrine in self-restraining terms.
Milliyetçilik anlayışımız Türk milletine karşı engin bir sevgi duymak.
He affirmed the right of every Turk to wish to the liberation of Turks under foreign rule. But he insisted that it was, in his words, essential to be realistic in our nationalism and to be on a path that will never lead Turkey into dangers. Pan-Turkism, in its mainstream Turkish articulation, even at its most ideological charged, was never a project to redraw borders. That's an important baseline for understanding what's actually possible today. The configuration began to shift only after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Pan-Turkic networks, including affiliates of the Grey Wolves, re-emerged in Azerbaijan and experienced a brief resurgence. Their sympathizers, led by Abu Faz el-Chibay, came to power and tried to translate Pan-Turkic rhetoric into state policy. The phase proved short-lived. Azerbaijan's defeat in the war with Armenia over Nagorno-Karabakh, along with the loss of surrounding territories, undermined el-Chibay's authority and pushed the country into political instability. His pan-Turkic positions also strained relations with Iran and with regional partners. Uzbekistan, under Islam Karimov, broke with Baku after Azerbaijan granted refuge to Karimov's political opponents. The same period saw a much wider Turkish push into the region. Ankara was the first to recognize the independence of the new Turkic republics. Under President Turgut Özal, more than 1,170 official delegations visited the region in the first year of independence, and over 140 bilateral cooperation agreements were signed by 1993. Özal himself died that year after an exhausting diplomatic tour of Central Asia. His successor, Süleyman Demirel, articulated the ambition in geographic terms, speaking of the Turkic world stretching from the Adriatic to the Great Wall of China. The response from Central Asian capitals was cautious from the start, and the reasoning was simple. These were states that had only just emerged from Moscow's tutelage. The governments in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan had no appetite to substitute a Russian elder brother for a Turkish one. Cultural and linguistic affinities did not translate into political deference. Pan-Turkic parties in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan remained marginal. Turkey's mid-1990s political instability and currency crisis hardened regional skepticism. Within Turkey itself, Pan-Turkism never really emerged from its marginal position. Society and the political elite prioritized other strategic directions. The dominant national project of the 1990s and early 2000s was integration with the European Union. Ankara's attempts to establish economic and political influence in Central Asia ran into structural limits quickly. It lacked the capacity to compete with the United States, China, the European Union, or Russia. The constraint, often noted half-jokingly but accurately, was financial. It has remained largely unchanged. That pattern from the 1990s, Turkish ambition meeting Central Asian polite hedging, turns out to be the most durable feature of this entire story. By political evolution, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is more accurately described as a pan-Islamist than a pan-Turkist. He has never been closely associated with nationalist ideology, and in his early career, he often regarded nationalist circles with skepticism. Consistent with a pan-Islamist orientation, his strategic ambitions were directed toward neighboring Middle Eastern states and post-Ottoman regional influence. Early in his tenure, Erdogan was widely regarded as a promising figure with significant popularity across the Middle East.
Erdoğan işte 2002 yılında partisi, 2003 yılı itibariyle de kendisi hali hazırda sürekli olarak iktidarda olan bir kişi ve artık hani bugünden yarına ben ne yaparımdan ziyade artık son zamanlarda özellikle ben nasıl hatırlanacağım, benim mirasım ne olacak, tarih beni nasıl yargılayacak, nasıl hatırlayacak düşüncesiyle bence Erdoğan'ın birçok karar aldığını görüyoruz. Erdoğan'ın deyişiyle Türkiye'den daha büyüktür diyor ya Erdoğan. Burada doğal olarak ilk olarak Osmanlı coğrafyasından bahsediyor. Osmanlı coğrafyasına bahsettiği zaman da doğal olarak işte Balkanlar, Kuzey Afrika ve Orta Doğu'dan bahsediyoruz. Burada da işte İsrail'le sürekli olarak bir sürtüşme üzerinden siyasi kazanım elde ettiğini görüyoruz Türkiye'nin içerisinde. Ben Erdoğan'ın daha fazla İslamcı olduğuna inanabilirim ama bu onun daha fazla Türk dünyasına önem vermediği anlamına gelmez.
His foreign policy was articulated through Ahmet Davutoglu's Zero Problems with Neighbors doctrine, which prioritized deep engagement with the Arab world. The high point came in 2011, at the height of the Arab Spring. Erdogan's reception in Cairo after the fall of Hosni Mubarak was not just diplomatic theater. It signaled a moment when Turkey appeared poised to lead a new political order in the Arab world. His model, combining electoral legitimacy, economic growth, and Islamic identity, was openly embraced by Rached Ghannouchi's Ennahda movement in Tunisia and Egypt's Freedom and Justice Party under Mohamed Morsi. The window closed quickly. The emerging Turkey-Qatar alignment triggered a counter-reaction from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which viewed Ankara's rise and its association with the Muslim Brotherhood as a direct threat. The decisive rupture came with the 2013 Egyptian coup d'etat led by Abu Fattah al-Sisi. With Morsi removed, Turkey's influence in Egypt collapsed, and Ankara's broader ambition to shape the post-Arab Spring order was effectively rolled back. Turkey's involvement in the Syrian civil war drew the country into a prolonged security crisis, marked by cross-border instability and terrorist attacks. Domestic pressures mounted. Electoral margins narrowed. This is the moment that shapes everything afterwards. Erdogan entered into a strategic alliance with Devlet Bahçeli of the Nationalist Movement Party, the MHP. It was a pragmatic convergence, a pan-Islamist leadership aligned with a pan-Turkic nationalist base to secure political dominance. It's here, around the mid-2010s, that the Pan-Turkic register began to enter Erdogan's foreign policy vocabulary in a sustained way. Not because Ankara developed a new doctrine, but because the Middle Eastern project had stalled and the Turkish nationalist constituency had become indispensable at home. Pan-Turkism didn't replace Pan-Islamism in Erdogan's politics, it joined it.
Turkey would mostly focus to Europe or Middle East. We cannot change geography, and it's political, economic interests mostly. Turkey are focused in those regions. And then one factor. The second factor, Erdogan itself isn't Pan-Turkic, he's a Pan-Islamist. He's using Pan-Turkism in his Pan-Islamic ideology. He's mostly focused in Arab streets. He knew Arab politics, he knew Arab streets, he knew how to deal with Arab countries. He doesn't know very well Turkic nations.
The continuity of the Islamist register is visible. Erdogan's engagement with Hamas, his posture toward Gaza and the wider Muslim world, his enduring rivalry with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, all of it speaks to the centrality of Pan-Islamism in his political identity. What's changed is that he now has a second register available, deployed in the same way and for the same ends. Both are flexible instruments for projecting influence into regional spaces where Turkey's material capacities are constrained. Both mobilize different domestic constituencies. Neither, on its own, constitutes a coherent grand strategy. So what distinguishes the OTS phase from earlier iterations? 3 developments. First, the regional balance has shifted. Azerbaijan's victories in the 2020 Second Karabakh War and the September 2023 operation that restored Baku's full control over the territory altered the strategic environment. Turkish drones proved decisive in 2020 and reframed Turkey's role from rhetorical patron to material guarantor. Defense exports, training arrangements, and joint exercises have since become a recurring instrument in Ankara's relations with Turkic partners, including Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan.
Türk dövlətləri bir-birinə əskəri sahədə də əməkdaşlığı çox güclü aparırlar. Azərbaycan Türkiyə artıq hərbi ittifaq da yaradıb, Şuşa bəyannaməsini imzalayıb. Azərbaycan, Türkiyə, Özbekistanla çox ciddi əskəri anlaşmalar var. Yeni müasir silahlarla bağlı, dronlarla bağlı. Amma eyni zamanda bu günə olaraq, reallıq olaraq Türk Dövlətlər Birliyi hələlik hərbi əskəri bloc deyil. Bu həqiqətən də belədir. Sadəcə olaraq bu sahədə çox güclü əməkdaşlıq edirlər.
Second, the institutional architecture has thickened. The Turkic Investment Fund has begun operations. The Common Alphabet Commission has advanced proposals for orthographic convergence. Parliamentary, educational, and media platforms have multiplied. None of this constitutes integration in the European Union sense. There's no shared market, no supranational authority, no binding political commitments. But the cumulative effect is a denser web of cooperation than at any previous moment. Third, the geopolitical environment has shifted. Russia's war in Ukraine has weakened Moscow's position in Central Asia and the South Caucasus, opening space for alternative external partners. China remains the dominant economic actor through the Belt and Road Initiative, but its presence is principally commercial and infrastructural. Turkey, by contrast, offers something the other major powers do not: a cultural and linguistic frame, defense industrial cooperation, and an explicit invitation to participate in a shared political identity.
Türk dünyasını indi birleştiren iki amil var. Birincisi bu siyasi irade ve istek. Türk xalqları bir-birinə çox yaxın, tarixi kökləri eyni, dini, mədəni kökləri eyni. Ona görə də bu xalqlar bir-birinə çox yaxındırlar. Bu xalqlar əməkdaşlıq etmək istəyirlər. Amma ortada bir qlobal mega proje də var. Orta dəhliz, Transxəzər dəhlizi. O da Türk dünyasının içindən keçir. Türk dünyasını birləşdirir. Avropa ilə Çin arasında Türk dünyası bu missiyanı yerinə yetirməlidir. Türk dövlətləri onun maliyyə məsələlərində həll etməlidirlər. Onun logistik məsələlərini həll etməlidirlər. Onun qanunvericilik məsələsi, gömrük məsələsini həll etməlidirlər və eyni zamanda onun təhlükəsizliyini də təmin etməlidirlər ki, bu orta dəhliz, dünya ticarətində böyük rol oynayan dəhlizin təhlükəsizliyi təmin olsun. Deməli, bu dövlətlərin arasında əskəri əməkdaşlıq da olmalıdır. Xüsusi təşkilatların da, istihbarat təşkilatlarının da əməkdaşlığı olmalıdır. Bu təbiidir və bu qaçılmazdır.
The May 2026 Astana agreements made this concrete. Kazakhstan became the first country outside Turkey licensed to produce the Anka combat drone under a package covering joint production, maintenance, and technology transfer. This is the most tangible defense industrial step the relationship has produced, and it's worth holding on to because of what the same summit did next. These shifts have produced the more theatrical expressions of the moment. Bahçeli's map at the 2021 Istanbul summit, Erdogan's Turan army rhetoric, Aliyev's claim that the Turkic world extends beyond OTS member states, statements that would have been unthinkable from a Turkish leader 2 decades ago. And those statements generate alarm in Tehran, in Moscow, in parts of the European press. The more so given Turkey's NATO membership and the substantial Turkic minorities inside Russia and China. But theater is one thing, strategic substance is another. And here's where the gap between what's said and what's possible becomes visible. The OTS member states themselves do not subscribe to a pan-Turkic political project. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in particular have been explicit through both rhetoric and policy that their participation is functional, not civilizational. And the clearest statement of that came from Tokayev himself at the May 2026 Turkestan summit, the day after he signed Eternal Friendship Declaration and the drone deal with Erdogan. Addressing the discussion of a possible military union directly, he said,
Türkü memleketlere uyumu geosayasi жоба емес, әскери uyum da емес. Бұл бауырлас елдердің сауда-экономикалық жоғары, технологиялық, цифрлық және мәдени-гуманитарлық ынтымақтастығын нығайтатын бірегей алаң.
He framed the unity of the Turkic world as a priority, but defined that unity in terms of trade and technology, not bloc politics. The summit's headline theme reinforced the point: not a Turan army, but artificial intelligence and digital development. This is the resolution of the contradiction we opened with. The same leader can sign $1 billion in agreements with Ankara and a declaration of eternal friendship, and in the same breath publicly cap what the organization is allowed to become. Cooperation is real. The civilizational project is refused out loud by the partner Turkey most wants inside it.
Erdogan ata yurdumuza hoş geldiniz. Hoş bulduk.
Astana maintains its multi-vector foreign policy, balancing China, Russia, Turkey, and the West with care. Tashkent, despite the warming under Shavkat Mirziyoyev, remains constitutionally committed to non-bloc neutrality. Neither government has any interest in being absorbed into a Turkic-led ideological architecture.
Və eyni zamanda Rusiyanın ərazisində 20 milyona yaxın Türk xalqları yaşıyor. Ona görə də Moskva çox narahatdır bu Türk dünyasının güclənməsindən və Türk dünyası ilə Rusiya arasında bir ölkə var, o da Kazakhstandır. Kazakhstan Türk dünyasının elə bir üçün qalxanıdır, bir siparıdır, bir səddidir ki, Rusiyanın təzyiqindən Türk dünyasını qoruyur. İlk olaraq Qazaxstan bütün təzyiqləri öz üzərinə götürür. Ona görə də Qazaxstan lideri biraz asta davranır, diplomatik davranır.
The hesitancy that defined Central Asian responses in the 1990s has matured into something firmer. The post-Soviet republics that resisted swapping a Russian elder brother for a Turkish one are now actively building room for themselves between all the larger powers. Multi-vector diplomacy is no longer a defensive posture, it is the strategic identity of these middle powers. The clearest illustration came in April 2025 at the first EU Central Asia Summit in Samarkand. In their joint statement, Central Asian heads of state reaffirmed UN Security Council Resolutions 541 and 550, both of which deny recognition of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. This was a striking signal. Northern Cyprus has held observer status in the OTS since 2022. Turkey is the only state in the world that recognizes it as sovereign. When forced to choose between alignment with the European norms and solidarity with their Pan-Turkic partner, the Central Asian governments chose Europe.
Türk dünyasında siyasi bir birlik ve bu siyasi birliğin etrafında işte X ülkenin şu konuda hassasiyeti var. O zaman biz bu ülkeye işte saygı gösterelim ve şu ülkeyle ilişkimizi bitirelim. Öyle bir kavram yok. Mesela buna en güzel örnek Azerbaycan ile İsrail arasında gerçekten çok iyi bir ilişki var. Maalesef, ve bunun altını çiziyorum maalesef derken, İsrail ile Türkiye arasında şu anda gerçekten ilişkiler bayağı kötü. Ama buna rağmen Azerbaycan, İsrail ile olan ilişkilerini kesmiyor. Bu siyasi kararların, iradenin Bakü tarafından alındığını ve Ankara'nın her ne kadar Bakü üzerinde etkisi olsa da belirli bir yere kadar Azerbaycan karar alma mekanizmasına etki edebildiğini görüyoruz. Okay? Yani bence bu diğer ülkeler için de geçerli.
The structural constraint identified earlier in this story remains. Turkey's economy, under sustained inflationary pressure and currency volatility, lacks the capacity to underwrite a Pan-Turkic project on the scale of Chinese investment in the region, or even on the scale of Russian energy and labor markets. Defense exports and educational programs are real instruments. They are insufficient to reorient the strategic calculus of Central Asian capitals.
Türkiye'de iqtisadi problemler var, ama eyni zamanda bu daxili məhsulun ölçüsünə görə Türkiye dünyada çok güçlü dövlətlərdən biridir. Daxili məhsulu biz hesablasaq. Azərbaycan iqtisadi tərəfdən çox güclü dövlətdir. Heç bir bizim iqtisadi asılığımız yoxdur başqa dövlətdən. Qazaxstan da çox zəngin ölkədir. Onun həm qaz, həm neftdən çox zəngindir. Onun da maliyyə resursları kifayət qədərdir. Özbəkistan indi çox güclü inkişaf eləyir. O iqtisadi inkişafına görə Avrasiya məkanında lider dövlətlərdən biridir. Həm bu dəhlizdə maraqlı olan Çin və Avropa İttifaqının iqtisadi yatırımları imkan verəcək ki, bu dəhliz və eyni zamanda Türk Dövlətlər Təşkilatı da kifayət qədər böyük iqtisadi gücə malik olsunlar. Mən qabaqda təqribən 10 ildən sonra Türk Dövlətləri Təşkilatının bu Avrasiya məkanında aparıcı təşkilatlardan birinə çevrilməsini mən gözləyirəm.
So what should you actually watch going forward? First, the institutional thickening. Whether the OTS develops binding mechanisms beyond the declarations and frameworks. Whether the Turkic Investment Fund grows large enough to compete with other financing sources. Whether the Common Alphabet effort produces actual convergence or remains a symbolic exercise. Second, defense cooperation. Turkish drones and training programs are the most concrete component of the relationship. Their expansion or contraction will tell you more about their trajectory than any speech at a summit. Third, Hungary's role. Budapest's observer status and Viktor Orban's personal investment in the Turanic vocabulary make it the most ideologically committed non-Turkic participant. Whether Hungary's own political turbulence affects this engagement is worth watching. Fourth, the Russian variable. If Moscow's position in Central Asia continues to weaken, the space available to alternative partners, Turkey among them, expands. If Russia stabilizes its regional posture, that space contracts. And fifth, Erdogan's domestic coalition. The MHP alliance is the structural region Pan-Turkic vocabulary entered Turkish foreign policy in a sustained way. If that domestic political configuration shifts, the rhetoric likely shifts with it. The former Kyrgyz politician Bakit Bashimov captured the underlying reality more bluntly than most Turkish or Western analysts have been willing to. The idea of a united Turkic world, he observed, is about the past, not about the future. And even in the past, Turkic peoples were happily fighting with each other. What's actually happening now is more measured than the alarm in Tehran or the headlines in Brussels suggest. Pan-Turkism has acquired institutional vehicles, symbolic vocabulary, and a measure of operational substance through defense cooperation. It has not acquired a financial base, the doctrinal coherence, or partner buy-in to become a transformative geopolitical project. The Cairo of 2011 has become the Astana of today, a venue where Ankara is welcomed, listened to, and quietly hedged against by partners pursuing their own agendas with other powers. Thanks for watching. This video is based on analysis by Rafael Satorov for the Turan Research Center. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to read the full piece. If you found this video informative, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. And let me know in the comments, do you think Turkey's Pan-Turkic toolkit is heading for genuine geopolitical substance? Or will it remain what Bashimov called a story about the past?